Travis, something's not working with mine. I'm kind of jilted going. I can hear you if you wait for clogging up here. Maybe it's just the internet connection.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the meeting of the City Council for the City of Wildwood for Monday, November the 9th, 2020, the work session. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Boland.
Here.
Councilmember Garitano.
Here.
Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Boat. Councilmember Bertolino.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Here.
Councilmember Nyan.
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Here.
Councilmember Bros. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Remy.
Here.
Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember McCune.
Here.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Okay, thank you. And again, welcome. No mayor comments or announcements. Moving into informational items, we have 8. Before we go to our action items, is there anything under information that any member of the council would like to discuss or about which you have a question? All right, seeing Councilmember Remy.
Just was one more thing. I just want to, sorry, I didn't see it on this document here. The word 3 access is not showing up on the work session agenda for today. The item that we talked about for tonight, Ms. Eldridge, remember the telecommunications. Oh, there it is. I'm sorry. It's right there. Number 3 under Department of Planning and Parks. Can I just address a question to Mr. Vunich?
Sure, go ahead.
So Mr. Vunich, at P&Z meeting, I know that this issue came up. Just to make folks aware of what we're talking about here is I've received a number of complaints from folks in Ward 2 and Ward 3 that have coverage issues associated with their cellular telephone or their iPad, etc. From Kerrs Mill Road all the way through almost going near Elegant Child and Shepherd Road, and they lose signal immediately. And during this COVID pandemic, as their internet service carrier has not been able to meet the demands that they've had for multiple usage at home, they've had to pull from their data plan, but unfortunately their data plan is insufficient because the cellular carrier that they have, namely AT&T, does not have sufficient coverage on Strecker Road through passing Shepherd Road as well as all the way to Elegant. So I know at the P&Z meeting, there was a need to, they delayed the 2 weeks the passage of the AT&T tower that's in that area, with a suggestion perhaps by Crown to see if they could improve coverage via a triangular approach, trying to improve that coverage. And I was just questioning or wondering whether or not we've heard anything specifically in regards to that, because I think this is an area of concern for a number of folks.
Well, Councilmember Remy, we've not heard anything from Crown Castle, the owner of the facility on Joe's Way, nor the contact person at AT&T Mobile, a gentleman named Greg Stockel. I'll follow up with them tomorrow and see what the status is. But I do want to let you all know that in typical fashion, when the Planning and Zoning Commission acts on an extension of a conditional use permit, you usually receive and file it the following Monday. Given the circumstances that the City Council will not meet until the November 23rd, we do have an extra couple of weeks to see what Crown Castle, AT&T Wireless, and the city can come up with. So we're not under the gun because, again, we have 3 weeks from today to kind of see if we can get an answer to your question.
Most appreciative. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes, Mr. Vunich, I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about the holiday lights. Not included in that attachment was a bid from Outdoor Lighting Perspectives that would essentially meet our budget constraints. And I believe in order to get on the schedule, we might have to have some sort of motion on that tonight. Is that correct?
I'll let the interim city administrator and the mayor tell me otherwise, but just for the benefit of the city council, the Economic Development Committee has been discussing how to generate traffic, both foot and vehicular traffic, in the town center area over the holiday season. In past years, we've done sporadic type of lighting and decoration of certain areas in town center. And then last year in 2019, we held the Winterfest, which I think was a very successful event, a partnership between the Wildwood Business Association and the city of Wildwood. The Economic Development Committee, recognizing that COVID-19 has played a role in almost every decision the city has made in some regards in 2020, decided that instead of holding an in-person event or trying to work within the parameters of the St. Louis County Department of Public Health, that we try lighting up town center more this year than in past years. Gary Cruz, our superintendent at Parks, went out and met with 3 different providers of holiday lighting and decorations. Those 3 bids were provided to you. At the end of the day, based upon our budget's constraints, the decision was made that really none of those were practical. And even in the case of the low bid, there were concerns about just practicality. Knowing that, Julia Jacquin, our interim deputy city administrator, Steve Cross, our interim city administrator, and others met and discussed what might work. And so the decision was made to spend up to $10,000 on holiday decorations and focus on the public plaza, the fountain at Fountain Place, and City Hall, along with the clock tower, our traditional location for the large wreaths, and Taylor Road and the Taylor Road, Manchester Road roundabout. And we think that between those 5 locations, so to speak, we could have a nice decorated town center for the holiday season and bring a little more light into what has been a dark year. Acknowledging that the bid is $10,000, with a email today from the president of the Wildwood Business Association, Emily Willis, it appears they want to take part in decorating the public plaza. And so we'll have a little extra funds, which I think, again, we can put toward Taylor Road, the Taylor Road, Manchester Road roundabout, and hopefully keep within that $10,000 limit. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions regarding the holiday decorations. I'll leave the questions about the Economic Development Committee's desire to its chair, Ms. Edens. Thank you.
I will say, typically as a committee, we would have made a formal recommendation to council, but when the bids were coming in, we had just had our meeting that day, and we won't be meeting again till the end of the month. And by then it's really too late to get on a lighting schedule. So that's why you were presented with different bids. And also just to let you guys know, we had a new and very welcome development happen midday. The WBA contacted us and has offered to essentially light up the trees in town square, which means that we could shift some of the resources we were originally going to allocate to more of Taylor Road, which would be really quite nice. So my understanding is, with the permission of the city, the WBA is now interested in letting businesses sponsor one tree each and help reimburse the city for some of the lighting costs. So that would kind of give it a fun, fresh take, as each business could decorate that tree in that little area, and we would still do our personal holiday tree as a city in that area, like we did last year as well. So, Mr. Vunich, my question for you is, are we still looking at $9,985?
With that particular provider, yes.
Okay.
The wreaths come out of a different fund that we allocate for that at the start of each budget cycle. And so it's not part of this contract. It's a different company. Glenn Gailey usually does Taylor Road, the Taylor Road, Manchester Road roundabout. And the interior of City Hall will be done by staff this year. So it may go over a little over $10,000, but again, it's through different contracts. So I wasn't sure quite how to handle that.
Okay, so my question for you is tonight, in terms of making a motion, do you want a motion for that bid with outdoor lighting perspectives at $9,985, or are we adjusting that because the WBA has offered to do that area? Or, and my understanding, it was a even horse trade, so to speak, so that the money in Town Center would just go directly to Taylor. Is that still correct?
Yes, and I guess what I would ask, just for the benefit of the interim deputy and the interim city administrators, that there be a motion to approve the bid at not to exceed $9,985 with the not to exceed language. That way, if we shift money around, we're still within the parameters of the motion.
Okay, so then I would like to make a motion for the staff to proceed with a contract for outdoor lighting perspectives not to exceed $9,985.
Joe, is that in the budget?
Based upon the conversations with our treasurer, who now is our interim city administrator, it's something we can afford.
Okay,
So I will
excellent.
defer to Mr. Cross on that.
Okay, thank you. We have a second from Councilmember Bartoni. Is there any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Garitano, I have you. Are you wanting to discuss this or something different?
Yeah, I'll discuss this.
Go ahead.
Happy to. I would just say, on behalf of Ward 8, I'm just so grateful and appreciative of the enthusiasm to decorate our streets here. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Anything else under information before we move to action items? Councilmember Edens.
Yes, well, first, maybe next year we'll get us a Hallmark movie filmed in Wildwood. But I just wanted to say, regarding the veterans programming, that Economic Development is pleased to support the veterans in our community. We would ask you to look at cityofwildwood.com/veterans for resources, everything from mental health to housing. But it's also lists our new business recognition program. So those businesses that are veteran owned or employ veterans, that there will now be a display sign at those businesses. And also the wonderful discounts or programs that are offered throughout the city. So we had a really great response. And I'm not sure, Julian, if you'd like to add anything, but I am just so thrilled.
Okay, thank you. Anything, Councilmember Clark?
I had a question for Mr. Brown about the Route 100 road safety audit. We got the memo that said that by the end of January, that should be, we should expect that RSA finished. Is that a target time to finish it, or is it just approximate?
Councilmember, I would say that's the date we're going to be pushing them to provide us the report. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't have direct control over MoDOT. We might wish we do or did, but all we can do is push and do our best to make sure we move forward and progress is made. And that's the date they have told us that they felt, or Ryan Percy felt he could finish the study and put the report together.
Okay, thank you. Anything further under information? All right, seeing none, we're moving into action items. We have two. First is consideration of the vehicle changes to the definition of commercial vehicle in our traffic code. We've been provided with the letter from Mr. Or from Councilmember McCutcheon as chair of the Planning and Parks Committee. And Joe, is there anything you would like to add to that, or in a nutshell, what is it, this change? I guess I'd ask you, just so we can crystallize the discussion here, what does this change specifically if it's adopted, number one, and number two, actually three questions. Number two, why is that change being suggested? And then number three, what are you looking for the council to do with respect to this evening?
Mr. Mayor, with your permission, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, back in January of this year, a report was presented to the members from the Board of Public Safety regarding a inconsistency between the traffic code and the zoning ordinance relating to commercial vehicles. When the recommendation of the Board of Public Safety was presented to the City Council, there was a lengthy discussion about the impact the definition as contained in the zoning ordinance would have on many of our residents that are either working from home or have vehicles from their companies that they drive on a daily basis, including the weekends. And so there was a desire to explore in greater detail what impacts might be created if we allowed limited parking of commercial type vehicles in residential districts, which includes the NU non-urban resident district. With that charge and the motion by City Council, the Planning and Parks Committee undertook a study of that particular question. Why the change? I think there was a desire on the part of City Council and particularly the Planning and Parks Committee to allow greater latitude in this regard. Currently, the zoning ordinance prohibits it outright. The only parking of commercial vehicles in the residential districts, including the non-urban resident district, are when they are parked in a garage or cannot be viewed from any adjoining roadway or abutting property. So it's a high standard or a strict standard. The desire of City Council was to see if there could be some leniency in that regard. The definition before you tonight does create that leniency, I think, within reasonable bounds based upon months of discussion between staff, the City of Wildwood Department of Planning and Parks, and the 8 committee members. I would note it is a major change. I've likened it to potentially opening Pandora's box, not knowing what we might end up with. But certainly, despite those risks or the spoken concerns of the department, the committee proceeded forward and I believe created a balanced definition for commercial vehicles in the zoning ordinance. Unless the city attorney would object, given this is a change to a definition in the zoning ordinance, the department would respectfully request tonight permission to forward from City Council this definition to the Planning and Zoning Commission for its public hearing, which there has not been one yet, and then recommendation back to City Council for future legislation if the members should choose. Thank you.
So you'd be asking for a motion to move forward with the public hearing on this item, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And
said it
I
much
just have
more
a couple of questions before we
succinctly.
start here. Was the vote by the Planning and Parks Committee unanimous?
Yes, sir.
And is the upshot of this essentially that pickups and so forth with logos and business identification tags and whatnot can be parked in and around the residences, whereas currently that's not allowed? Is that the case?
That's correct, sir. The weight limit is 10,500 pounds. And there's a number of tables that have been attached along with diagrams indicating what kind of vehicles meet that weight limit, then exceed that weight limit as well. But yes, that's exactly it, sir.
Okay. I'm sorry, one last question. What was you said this came through the Board of Public Safety and there was an inconsistency. So why was it proposed that the inconsistency be changed in this direction as opposed to other provisions that would have resolved the inconsistency?
Well, the Board of Public Safety wanted to change the traffic code to correspond to the zoning ordinance, the more restrictive of the two. And again, as I mentioned, when this was presented in January 2020 to City Council, there was a desire to provide greater flexibility to our residents, particularly those that drive, let's say, company cars or vehicles from their organizations home, and those that have home-based businesses, and then obviously with COVID as well.
Is there a distinction, sorry, one more question. Is there a distinction, Joe, in the changes that separate vehicles with logos and ladders and things other than just a company vehicle that does not have all of those things? Because I get calls on and emails about the former, I don't about the latter. So is that distinction somewhere in this provision as a resulting distinction if this is adopted?
There are two major components that remain from the original zoning ordinance definition. The first deals with any large vehicle that has a trailer, a work trailer attached to it that combined exceed that 10,500 pound weight limit. So what we were trying to avoid, we being the Planning and Parks Committee and city team members, was to have a large commercial vehicle with an attached trailer that would be parked in the driveway and block the sidewalk or extend into the street. Secondly, the definition still identifies certain vehicles as unsuitable, those that would be of a large scale, obviously potentially exceeding the 10,500 pound weight limit, but also others that just wouldn't fit in a residential setting, school buses, garbage trucks, et cetera.
Okay, well, I guess what I'm getting at is what if the distinction would be in a subdivision, there's a car or a pickup that has no indicia of business affiliation on it. The logos have been removed. A lot of times you can do that nowadays versus a car that's essentially shrink wrapped in yellow and orange and other vibrant colors that's parked on the street or in someone's driveway. I think those are two different things. And I guess my question is, and I think the residents might see that as well. So my question is, I hear what you're saying as to large trucks with trailers and large trucks in general, but as to standard cars and other trucks and other automobiles, is that distinction somewhere in this set of rules if this goes forward?
No, sir. We would treat them the same.
Councilor McCune?
Thank you. And Mayor, I think I really appreciate all your questions and concerns that you brought forth. I think it's important that we go at this slowly, and I think that we've been looking at this quite extensively. But I joined the Parks and Planning as a participant at their last meeting regarding this last discussion on the traffic code. And I had asked several questions of Mr. Vunich as well. And I guess it's just important to maybe address that here, is that I'd asked Mr. Vunich, how many complaints have we received since we started from January till now? I think this started because it was one particular resident, maybe in Ward 7, that was complaining. But we haven't had any complaints since then to your department. Is that correct, Mr. Vunich?
Actually, it's kind of tailed off. I don't know if it's COVID related or what, but yes, it's been very quiet on the commercial vehicle front.
Yeah, and I think it was important that you mentioned in both meetings about the Pandora's box of that the regulation now sets really well. And I was a proponent to offering stay-at-home people to have their vehicles, maybe the State Farm or, Farmers Insurance that has a small decal. But from this new zoning, what you're saying is fully wrapped vehicles. And Mayor, like you said, orange, yellow, bright colors that are completely shrink wrapped will be allowed this time, whereas before they weren't. So trying to limit, different signage and things, I understand it's a tricky situation, but some of those can be quite obnoxious and loud and not appealing to the eye sitting on the street or in somebody's driveway. So as I understand it, I think that the ordinance that we had prior to this change was doing a great job. So I just want to warn the council that this is kind of what we're opening up, and I want to make sure that we're clear and things fall into place. But also I'd asked at Parks and Planning, like who enforces this, because there's two different codes. And if you notice the times, it's from midnight till 6 a.m. Well, the code enforcement officers are tasked with that job, but who's up at midnight till 6 in the morning to report these violations? So, and it's more of the resident self-reporting. So I think that we're putting on a lot of task onto our city employees to regulate or police this, whereas our police department can help, but this is not where this is driven. Is that correct, Mr. Vunich, at this time? I mean, I know it can change, but at this moment, am I correct on what I'm stating?
The police department and the code enforcement officers have always kind of deferred to the zoning ordinance definition because it was more restrictive and more detailed. So determinations in terms of commercial vehicles was easier. Given that we were using the zoning ordinance, let's say in 9 out of 10 cases, yes, the enforcement primarily came to the Department of Planning and Parks. But certainly, as you know, midnight to 6 a.m. in the morning is not an opportunity, is not when our code enforcement officers are in the office or available. And so we will depend on the police department to assist.
So these big vehicles that are over this requirement can be parked on the street at 8 p.m. and I can sit here and stare at them until I go to bed. And if they're parked there when I wake up in the morning, it's past 6, they're still there. So even though they're over the 10,000 pounds, as long as we don't catch them through these hours, it's still permissible. Is that correct?
Well, there's always an opportunity to avoid the regulations. No regulation can be that detailed as to address every circumstance. But as I have told the committee, and I will tell City Council, we do the very best we can, and we do depend on individuals to help us, and that includes the police department. And
absolutely, and I appreciate. Yeah, and I appreciate the efforts. I'm not going against the department or anything. I still just have some concerns. I think the time restriction and how this is going to work and how it is now, it's more restrictive than not. But, when the waking moments of when I see these vehicles is during the day and this is only restricted at night, I don't see how it's really helping us at all as far as the visual aspect of what we see as a commercial vehicle in residential areas such as Ward 7, where we're pretty crowded and the streets are narrow. So those are my comments. I'd love to hear other people's take on it and see where we go. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. One follow-up in relation to your question, Councilmember McCune, about the number of complaints that we've received or haven't received since, I believe you said January. Certainly, if one takes as a presumption that rules have an effect of discouraging people from doing things, to the extent that this has changed, you might see more than what we currently do, since they would be allowed, whereas they are currently prohibited. And I'm assuming a number of our residents try to comply with the rules. Councilmember Bartoni.
Thank you. So we discussed this many different meetings for planning and parks, and I think we eventually did land a plane in a pretty good place. At the same time, trying to take into concerns like Councilmember McCune mentioned, but then also just trying to be good neighbors and good residents as well. So with that being said, I will make a motion to move forward with the department's recommendation of sending this to planning and zoning and be interested in what they come back with.
Okay, so we have a motion to, is that what you're wanting, Joe? Is you send it to planning and zoning for hearing?
Yes, I think, given that the definition in the zoning ordinance is being changed to a substantial degree, I think the Planning and Zoning Commission can hold a public hearing. We can do better notification and hopefully have the public hearing and get a lot of feedback. So as City Council, when it receives it back, can make the best decision.
Okay. Did we get a second to that, Councilor Dodwell, your second?
I'll second it, but I do want to concur with Councilmember Bartoni that we did go through a lot of discussion on this effort. And I want everyone to realize that we do have companies that require individuals to take their vehicles home that are provided, insurance companies, construction companies, and those are just pickup trucks and regular vehicles that may have some wording on them or some insignias on them. I think all of us were in some agreement that if it's a major annoyance, then it needs to be reported, and we can look at our requirements at that time and issue a whatever we normally issue to hopefully subvert that from occurring. But since we haven't had many complaints or issues from individuals as we've been going through this past year, I don't see that this is going to curtail the city staff or our police department from deterring annoyances that major annoyances that our neighbors may have. So I'm going to make a second.
Councilmember Garetano.
Yeah, hearing the feedback from tonight, I'm thinking that maybe perhaps it might make sense before we take it to planning and zoning that the Planning and Parks Committee that's been working on it have another look at it one more time and then send it in a good state to planning and zoning for that, given the amount of dialogue, especially this feedback we heard around like the wraps and things like that.
Well, I think we discussed that at great length during our committee meeting. I'd like to get the planning and zoning perspective on this prior to additional council discussions so that we get a perspective from them on that. That's just my perspective.
So were you making a motion to refer at that point?
Well, I'm interested. I mean, I would certainly want to get the language right before we take it to planning and zoning, and then there's a public hearing and bring the public in when we know we're comfortable with it. But maybe if somebody else from Planning and Parks wants to opine on it, you know, I don't know. I'll ask Ms. McCutcheon what she thinks.
Councilmember McCutcheon, with your indulgence, Councilmember Remy, you're next on the list.
I was just seconding it.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure you didn't get caught out of turn and offended there. Councilmember McCutcheon.
We have quite a bit of discussion on this issue. There are a couple points that I'm a little uncomfortable with. The committee did work very hard on this issue, but given the discussion this evening, I think it would behoove us to take it back to Planning and Parks and look at it a little bit more closely, given the comments that we've received this evening. And maybe we can make some adjustments before it goes to Planning and Zoning.
I'll take that as a motion to refer back to Planning and Parks, seconded by Councilmember Garetano. With the report back date, 30 days, do you think that's sufficient?
I think that's good.
With a report back in 30 days. So the motion on the floor now is a motion to refer back to Planning and Parks for further consideration of some of the items that were mentioned this evening, with a report back to the council in 30 days. Any discussion on the motion to refer? Councilmember Edens?
I was looking up I think it's the GCR rating of vehicles that are over that 10,000 pound. One of my concerns is, should there also be a consideration for the type of vehicle rather than just the weight? Because in my Googling, and please understand, I don't have a lot of knowledge of cars, but it seemed to me like paneled vans can qualify. And I seem to think of a paneled van as very commercial and not just a personal style of vehicle. And so unless I misunderstand, that does not, that falls into the new ordinance that it can.
Are you speaking in favor of referral back?
I am, but what would be helpful is when that's referred, if you guys can come back with more information about the types of vehicles more than just a weight, because that's a kind of a separate concern. I think I just like a little bit more detail. Looking it up, you can still have rather large pickup trucks, I think, that are in that weight class, but a paneled van is just a red flag for me. So like, I know there's lots of new Amazon vans, that are completely wrapped. I don't know how much they weigh. So I'm just wondering what that looks like. Thank you.
So without objection, we'll have an understanding that the questions and comments from this evening's meeting will be considered in total including those by the Planning and Parks Committee if this motion to refer is passed. Seeing no objection to that, any further discussion on the motion to refer? Councilmember Remy?
I'm going to vote against the motion to refer. I think that we can tonight send it to P&Z and get public participation. I think that when I was part of Parks and Planning, we discussed this. We also discussed this with the new Parks and Planning group here. And I actually think it's a really nice policy that they put forth here. So I don't know that we need to send it back and forth a few more times. I think we could refer it immediately to P&Z and let them do what they're going to do with it and get public input on it. I also do think in a time right now, as mentioned about COVID, there are a lot more unfortunate opportunities where people have to use their vehicles because they don't have an office to actually go to, but they do have a vehicle that they're supposed to use for work. And I don't want to actually infringe upon their ability to make a living in these tough times. And I think getting this to P&Z and getting this to legislation sooner is better than referring it back.
So do we have any evidence of that, or is that just what we're thinking the case is?
What's that now?
That there are people with wrapped vehicles that are at home because of COVID.
So in regards to the evidence, we don't have evidence on half the stuff people mentioned tonight. We just have speculation from everyone up here, right? And I do believe in knowing that people do have their business vehicles at home, that there may be an opportunity for us to accelerate this process. I don't think going to P&Z is I think going to P&Z is the best way for us to streamline this to come back to council rather than going to another committee to come back to council, to go back to P&Z, to come back to council. So that's why I'm going to oppose going back to Parks and Planning. I'd rather the first motion that was made that we actually never voted upon, we actually vote on that motion. So I'm going to vote against the current motion to go back to Parks and Planning.
Okay, thank you. Councilor McCune.
So just to follow up with Council Member Remy to understand the opposition, I can give examples of wrapped vehicles at home right now in Ward 7 due to COVID. I can bring those people forward, but I think that based on my discussions with Mr. Vunich, because I see Ward 7 has a large influx of commercial vehicles of all different types because we're closer together and the streets are pretty windy, is that I think that the department has given leeway or understanding during the COVID situation. And if the mayor could maybe postpone or suspend this ordinance based on that from a COVID standpoint, like we do businesses to operate on the parking lot, if that's the case, given our current pandemic. Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, but if that's the concern from COVID, then maybe we could just suspend those enforcements for pandemics as such. But I think that I think that this needs to be deferred. So I'm going to support that, but I'd like that question answered, Mayor.
We could do that. In other words, I could suspend that ordinance under the Emergency Resolution 2020-11. However, I would not do that without evidence that there is a connection between I would want to see the examples and the degree of the widespread nature of it throughout our city before I took that approach. I think, as you've seen over the past several months, that resolution has been used very judiciously and only when really necessary, number one. Number two, I would just say that while the COVID thing is undeniably important, I'm not sure that that needs to be the tail that's wagging the dog, because presumably we've heard previously that there's going to be a vaccine relative to that. Once the resolution, or I'm sorry, once an ordinance is passed, yes, it can be amended, but passing an ordinance to have wholesale changes, certainly of this nature, because of an issue that hopefully is going to be something temporary for our society. And once we get past it, we should just keep in mind that the ordinance changes remain in place. So there might be with respect to accommodating the COVID issues, there might be a better way to do it. But in any event, next on the list is Councilor Dodwell.
I just wanted to agree with Councilmember Remy. I think this needs to move forward to planning and zoning, and I think we need to make it very public. It's unfortunate that Mr. Vunich did not include the graphics that outlined what the different types of vehicles were that we had when we were in committee, so that all of the council members could understand what was being discussed at that meeting, and what was going to be provided as part of this ordinance was to be a document that had graphic images of the types of vehicles that would be made available. So I am not going to approve of pushing this back to parks and planning. I think it needs to go before our planning and our P&Z department, excuse me, and make sure that that document that has the various levels of vehicles goes with it, so that they are fully aware of all the details of the discussion that was had, and that they can then have the public look at that as well when we get ready to do our public hearing. And I think that will also help the council members better understand what we are talking about.
Councilor Bartoni.
Thank you. So the one thing that we probably didn't make real clear is when P&P started looking at this, we started, I believe, and Deborah, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was back in January or February. So it was before COVID. So this is not an ordinance because COVID invited itself into our country and into our community. This was something that we have been looking at since before that. Just with the whole COVID thing, there was probably some consideration for that. And there might have been a couple modifications, but this ordinance is not because people are working from home and there's a vehicle parked in a driveway that wasn't there last December or whatever. So I kind of, I'm not going to vote. I think we need to get this to go to P&Z. Let's get a different set of eyes on this. We looked at this almost every month for like the past 8 months, and it kind of just grows. You think about this and then, oh, well, we didn't think about that. Oh, well, you know what, we got to think about this also. And at the end of the day, you're also trying to protect working people out there, small business people, guys that own their own companies. And that is all part of what we took into consideration. So I agree. I think that what Katie said, Joe did a great job of just outlining this out for us, and P&Z will have that, and they might come back with something different, but I don't think it's going to be considerably different. And I think we kind of got something pretty good here, but let's let the public look at it, and let's let, a different committee look at it.
Councilor Garitano.
Yeah, I'll just state why I think it's important to get it right and send it to planning and parks. And I think I'm hearing admission that it's not right. It's not perfect, but let's let P&Z take it and fix it. And if that's, if P&Z would have sent stuff over to us and say, hey, we're done, but we know there's an issue with it, we want you to fix it, it wouldn't be so good. So I think if we want to put our name on it, we want to get it right. And hearing tonight the different opinions, and this is a work session item, it's not part of our council. I think it's the opportunity is to have it correct, get it done right, and then send it over to planning and zoning and make good use of our residents' time, not bring them in knowing that there's obviously dissent with the way it is here tonight. So again, I just would iterate, if we could, I would suggest we try to get it correct, then send it over to Planning and Parks to do that.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is for referral. Roll call vote. Councilor McCutcheon? Sure.
So we were really walking a fine line here. One is because of citizen complaints, and the other is to support our citizens who have a business, own a business, are required by their company to bring their vehicle home. So we were really trying to do a balancing act here. But, and I'm all for moving it forward originally so that we could get public input on it. But I do think we need to go back, take a look at it one more time, given the discussion this evening, so that we can maybe nail some things down before it does go to P and Z and before it goes out to the public.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further discussion, the motion on the floor is a motion to refer back for 30 days to Planning and Parks to consider the items mentioned this evening. A yes vote is for referral, a no vote is against referral. If the motion fails, we'll go back to the main motion. Roll call vote on the motion to refer, please.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
No.
Councilmember Bernardino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
No.
Councilmember Ryan,
No.
Councilmember Bartoni,
No.
Councilmember Clark,
No.
Councilmember Edens,
I'm going to change to no.
Councilmember Remy,
No.
Councilmember Farmer,
No.
Councilmember Galani,
No.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
No.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
So the motion to refer fails. We're now back to the main motion, which is to send this to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I think we've had exhaustive discussion about it. All those in favor of the motion to send to, actually, we'll do a roll call on this. On the motion to send to Planning and Zoning, roll call vote.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Bernardino,
No.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Ryan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
No.
Councilmember Garitano.
No.
So the motion to send to the Planning and Zoning passes. All right, we're moving next to our second item, which is an executive session. We'll need a motion to go into executive session, and that needs to be by roll call vote, as you know by now. We have a motion by Councilmember Farmer, second by Councilmember Flasher. Any discussion on the motion to go into executive session? Seeing none, roll call vote on the motion, please, Ms. Elbert.
Councilmember Bernardino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Ryan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Abstain.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Abstain.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to do executive session in this room because it has more social distancing capabilities. So those of you in the audience, if you'd please let us have some time to ourselves for the next few minutes. And then once we finish the executive session, we'll come back and adjourn the work session and go into the main meeting of the council. Thank you. is already 7 o'clock. Before we leave, I want to thank Councilman Garitano for his work in
And if I could ask everyone to return the
It's rejoining the video now. Okay. There we go.
No, I can't get mine to go to full screen.
The meeting of the City Council for the City of Wildwood for Monday, November the 9th, 2020. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll? Here. We're calling the roll. Go ahead, please. Here.
Councilmember Garetano. Councilmember Flasher.
Here.
Councilmember Foat. Councilmember Bernardino.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell. Here. Councilmember Nyan. Here. Councilmember Bartoni.
Here.
Councilmember Gross. Councilmember Clark. Councilmember Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Remy. Councilmember Farmer.
Here.
Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember McCune.
Here.
Councilmember Rambo. Councilmember McCutcheon.
Okay, thank you. And for those of you who are comfortably able, and those of you that are with us this evening in council chambers, thank you for being here and welcome. If you'd please stand with me for the saying of our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. And next on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the council's October 26, 2020 work session and regular meeting. If you have any comments on the minutes, we can take those now or suggested changes. Otherwise, I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Motion to approve made by Councilmember Flasher. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember McCutcheon. Any discussion on the motion? See no discussion. All in favor of the motion to approve the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving next to public comment. Just want to mention for public participation a couple of items relative to how this proceeds. First of all, anyone who wishes to speak, if you're with us this evening in the council chambers, must complete a speaker card and provide it to the city clerk, who is seated to the left of the podium. When your name is called, please approach the podium and state your name and ward. To ensure that all who wish to have the opportunity to speak do so, there is a 5-minute time limitation, and I will let you know when that is reached. If you have any questions for us, please mention that during your remarks and identify the official that you would like to respond. That official will make note of it, and at the conclusion of public participation, any official who chooses to respond will have 3 minutes to do so as to all questions directed to that official. The official may choose to respond to your questions after tonight's meeting, and we may also post the responses on the City Council page of our website. And finally, please be respectful to others in making your remarks. This means that interrupting others and using profane and abusive language are prohibited. And for those of you who may be with us on Zoom this evening that wish to speak publicly, please now raise your hand. As soon as we finish with those in the chambers, we will look to you, if any, for your opportunity to speak. With that, first speaker card, please.
Our first speaker card is Victoria Allen, wishing to comment on the Special Circumstances Overlay District.
Well, the first thing I need tonight is some clarification. Probably John Young is the most, understands this the most. And that is on page 10, item 3 under the, oh, I don't know what it's under. I cut that out. Anyway, it's number 2. And this pretty clearly refers to the Callahan property. And what I need to know, is there anything in this document that would exclude the Callahan property from the SCODE? Because as it stands now, we have no protection. The city is our only protection from this site.
So I don't know that it's appropriate for you to. Yeah, so unfortunately, during public participation, if you have questions for the council or for me, you can ask those under our ordinance, but it's really just a time for you to speak and for us to listen to you. And so it's not workable for the city attorney to answer questions during that.
We presented the document to Joe and to John, our recommendations on what we thought should be included to protect us from these properties. And of course, I understand that you have other things that are involved in this property. What we received back on Friday night is yet another document that we can't understand. It's another language. So we took and we put something, we gave you something in plain English that another city had used successfully. And I mean, I struggled all weekend. And I suppose you wonder probably like, why am I the only one that's here? Because I am the one that has spent 6 weeks poring over this document, trying to understand. I have read for 6 weeks, and I have read hundreds of pages that I understand. And then I get this back and I don't understand it. So I need some questions. And I think that, you know, I mean, if any of you can answer that question, that would be fine too. I would be happy to hear your answer. So what I need to know from you, and or I don't need to know it from you, but what you have to answer yourselves is, and I know you read this amended ordinance, but did you look up what the ATSM standard E1527-B and the ATSM standard E1528-14C and the 40 CFR part 312 and the 40 CFR, some squiggly that I have no idea what it means, 312.10 parentheses B, and the substances as defined as hazardous substances. Did you go and read the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act of 1980 as amended, 42 USC 9601 at SEEK, or the Hazardous Materials Transportation Act as amended, 49 USC 1801 at SEEK, or the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act as amended, 42 USC 6901 at SEEK? Or did you read sections 260360, 260500, or 260565 RSMO? If you didn't go and find these, and they weren't linked for you, so you had to go dig for them. If you didn't spend the time to find them and to read them, you can't possibly vote this thing in because you won't know what you signed. Now, I would like to think that all of you went through and spent the hours that it took to go find these things and read them. But I believe you have a life, and I believe that you have a family, and I believe that you have a job, and I believe you have a really big job here. And if you don't understand this, you've asked all kinds of questions on whether people can park their cars or their work vehicles, but I haven't heard a lot of questions. Nobody has asked me a question, and I have spent as much time on this as anybody, and probably more, because it directly affects me. So those are the things that I really want to say. I found something that was really interesting today. Did you know that dioxin is 60,000 times more potent and more deadly than cyanide? So when you read these documents, they say, oh, we only found a couple nickels, just the size of a couple nickels. Well, the size of a couple nickels could probably kill a city. So you need to think about that, because that is what is on these properties. Now it's all cryptic in here, and they never say the word. The word is not in this document at all. So nobody's going to come in. I mean, you guys don't read legalese. You're all different professions. How can you sign this document? You don't know what it means. The only people that know what it means is maybe Joe and Jim and John, because they're attorneys. We gave you a document that an amendment to the document. We asked reasonable questions, intelligent questions, and I don't know if it's in here or not because I don't read this language. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker card, please.
The next speaker card is Andy Irvine, wishing to speak about the historic area of Orville.
May I just say one thing, 5 seconds? I just want you to know that we have a new cancer case that was diagnosed this morning in our area. So that's where we live.
Thank you. Next speaker, please, Mr. Irvine.
My name is Andy Irvin. I live at 554 Etherton Road in the historic area of Orville in Wildwood. And recently, the city with Pace Engineering has put a new bridge on Etherton Road. And part of the wrap up of that is the city is installing a fence along the creek for a safety issue for my property. Today, I noticed that the construction workers who were putting up my fence are also putting up a fence at 542 Etherton Road, which is not a historic property, but it is in the historic area of Orville. And there was a fence existing before the bridge project and the road widening in that area. And it was like just rails and open and about this high in stature. The posts that are in there now are 5 to 6 feet tall, and the panels of fencing that are going to be put up tomorrow are solid panels. It's like a wall. This is a historic area. So I'm asking the city of Wildwood tonight and to have Joe Vunich and anyone else who is responsible put a cease and desist order into effect tomorrow morning so that those panels cannot go up until the Wildwood Historic Preservation Commission has had a chance to review this, that all my ward reps have a chance to weigh in on this, and anyone else in Wildwood that cares about maintaining the historic legacy of this beautiful area that we live in. There's a lot more going on at this address, as you're all well aware. But I'm asking you all to put a cease and desist order into effect. Get Joe or whoever is necessary to do it tomorrow morning before those panels go up. And if you can't do it, I need to know why. Someone needs to tell me why you can't stop that. Thanks.
Thank you. Question to the city attorney. So that item that Mr. Irvine's mentioned is not on the agenda. So I don't think for sunshine law purposes, we can discuss it. But I guess one question I have for you is, can you please, and I think this would be permissible, work with Mr. Vunich in the morning to consider the speaker's comments and whatever action the city may need to take relative to that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Without objection, that's what we will do. Okay. Any other speaker cards?
I do not have any other speaker cards.
Okay. And I don't see anyone on Zoom. So that will take us to our announcements and appointments. We actually have 2 appointments. I'm sorry, we have 1 announcement, which is we are joined this evening, I believe, if they are online. Are they online, Travis, the MSD representatives?
Yes, sir.
I did not see them earlier.
He is being moved over right now.
So do we have MSD representatives with us this evening?
Hello, yes, my name is Jeff Reapy.
Okay, thank you for being here, Mr. Reapy. Are you the only one from MSD that's joining us this evening?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, that's
I
fine.
was unable to make it.
Okay, that's all right. Well, thank you so much for being here. So council members, this is the opportunity. If you have any questions or comments for MSD relative to our city, this would be the time to raise those. It's not the only time you can do it, but it allows members of the public to be aware of some of the issues. And if any member of the council would like to start, I'll defer to you first. Otherwise, I've got a couple of things. Councilmember Remy.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Actually, I'm very happy you're here. I don't know if you recall, but we had you speak at our watershed erosion task force about a month ago. And at that time, when we discussed some of the watershed and flooding issues, we brought to your attention that there were only 2 projects listed on the MSD prioritization for the upcoming years. And I guess my question really refers to that. We've got a lot of major issues that we brought to your attention at that meeting and have followed up subsequently, but have not seen any further projects come onto the docket for Wildwood. And as you know, by land, Wildwood is the largest municipality in this entire region, which has a very unique topography and landscape. So it's a bit frustrating for me, at least looking at the public website, to not see that that's been changed. If you could shed some light on perhaps 2 things. One, am I just misreading this and that there are additional projects that will be prioritized for Wildwood? And 2, if not, how can we get them on the docket for the upcoming year, sir?
That's what I was going to raise. Mr. Rippey?
So I'm sorry, the audio was breaking up a little bit there, but I think what I took from the question was how many projects are on MSD? How many projects has MSD identified in Wildwood? And when might those projects be funded?
Well, that was sort of the question, and I'll defer to Councilman Remy. Obviously, it was his question, but as I understood it, so you had met with our watershed erosion task force, and they had discussed the possibility, or I believe their expectation, that MSD was going to come up with a list of priorities for the city. And Councilman Remy had just commented that he hadn't seen that on MSD's website as being updated. So I think the specific questions were, one, if assuming that's the case, when is that going to occur? And if so, when will that occur? Is that correct, Councilman Remy?
Yes. Is my audio better this way? Are you able to hear me a little bit better in this fashion? Still no. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, that's a little better. So I'm not, and maybe there was a misunderstanding. I'm not aware that MSD was going to necessarily identify a group of projects in Wildwood following our meeting. Typically, the way projects are identified for MSD is we are driven by customer complaints. So if our operations crews go out and there is a complaint that they investigate and they deem that that complaint is worthy of an MSD project or it's something that MSD can address, then they will identify those that project at that time. The other method that many municipalities have used where we've identified projects is if they put together some sort of planning study or stormwater planning study that identifies projects in their community that they think are of concern, then MSD will, you can share that document with us and we will take a look at that document, and then projects that meet our, fit into kind of our mold of things that we would do, we would then capture those projects and put them on our list also of identified projects. So it was my understanding that that may be something that the task force was going to look into at some point. But beyond that, it's possible that operations has identified some projects since the meeting that we had back in January. But as I sit here today, I'm not aware of those, and I didn't know exactly what the topics we were going to discuss tonight were, so I don't have anything really prepared that I can share with you.
Just a point of clarification. When we met in January, you said the exact same thing. And we actually have had a number of complaints brought to exactly the same methodology that you just delineated, as well as we from the city have brought projects that we wanted prioritization for. I think now, 10 months later, we can't say the same thing. These should have been prioritized, and we should be seeing more than just 2 projects at this point. So I understand that you may not be aware of these, but we did follow the channels that you had specified back in January. And what you're telling us here tonight is that nothing has changed.
And I think we need to look into that. So there's an opportunity here, I believe, especially for the land size of this city and the projects that we have delineated already to you and your company. That we would expect that you would take these seriously and appropriately prioritize them so that we can at least address them, because many of these are specifically related to MSD concerns and projects that we would think that you would take a bit more seriously 10 months into it.
So if I may, Mr. Rippey, if you'll just indulge me 1 second. Two things I want to mention, and we'll get to the list of prioritization in just a second. But relative to the resident complaint being the genesis of MSD projects, while certainly I would agree resident complaints should be a significant factor that MSD or any organization, in your position would consider, as a practical matter, I think particularly with the case of watershed erosion, it's the situation that a lot of our residents simply don't know that it may be your responsibility. And therefore, if they don't know that it's MSD's responsibility, how would they know to reach out to you? But putting that aside, relative to the prioritization and whatever may or may not have happened over the last 10 months, if we, Mr. Rippey, could get a list of these through our watershed erosion task force to you in the next 7 to 10 days, would you be able to look at those and maybe rejoin the council in 30 days with your assessment of those?
Yeah, we can certainly take a look at any list of projects that you've identified. I do know that our operations crews, I think members of those crews may have gone out with members of the task force and walked some of the reaches of the creeks to look at specific locations. But typically, if they have identified a project, that would come up through engineering, and I've not seen those to date. So I don't know, whether they didn't. I'm not sure what the situation is with that.
Okay, so that would be to find out the answer to that, of course. And then, Councilor Remy, would you be agreeable to getting a list to them? Okay. So Mr. Vinich is listening, and he'll work with that. And I think, Mr. Rippey, where we're ultimately headed is trying to see if we can set in place something concrete relative to MSD and the City of Wildwood working collaboratively. Right hand knows what left hand's doing, so on and so forth, getting target dates and funding sources and whatever is needed to be done relative to moving that important matter forward. Is that a fair statement, Councilman Ray? Okay, are you agreeable to that, Mr. Rippey?
Yes, if you can get us a listing of problem areas or projects, we can certainly take a look at that.
Okay, and then one other item, I'm sorry, Councilman Dodwell, go ahead and I'll raise mine next.
I just have an easy question, I hope. Given that we can provide you that information in 2 weeks, is it possible for us to be able to have your response by our first meeting in January? That gives you a month and a half to respond. I was hopeful that your counterparts and yourself could pull some information together that was meaningful to the city, not just another, well, it's not on the list yet.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yes, we can. I don't know what the projects are going to look like, but we can certainly take a look at what you provide and provide some comments back.
Even if it's not, yes, this is what we're going to do, a comment back would be appreciated.
Sure. Understood.
Although we do hope it is, yes, you'll get it done.
Yeah.
So we will, without objection, have, and if you're okay, if your schedule will accommodate Mr. Rippey, the second Monday in January, we will have, will be the first meeting of the council. And if you could just tentatively plan to join us again for that, and without objection, we'll have Mr. Rippey back before the council. And before we close off here, I have one thing. Go ahead, Councilmember Garitano.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know that MSD is aware of certain issues. We've had Brian Muse, and I think we talked about it the last time when MSD attended one of our meetings, but that I know Mr. Muse had come out to see some locations. So as far as MSD being aware. I do believe that, and I do recall at that last meeting, I think that we were submitting our items to, city staff here to, I would assume that was going to be handed over to MSD. So I just want to reiterate that.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, Mr. Rippey, I have one item, and I know you've heard of this one before, Lake Chesterfield. One of the things I guess I would ask you to do, and that's a top priority for many of our residents, and by top priority, I mean finally and conclusively fixing the drainage issue. And like I said, I know you've been aware of that. It's surfaced previously. One of the things that I would ask you to do in the same interim between now and January is consider what, if any, measures your organization, MSD, might be willing to do to partner with the city to resolve the drainage concern for our residents.
Yeah, we can look into that. I am not personally, I mean, I've looked through a file or two that we have related to Lake Chesterfield, but I've not been to the site. I know that there is a problem with sinkholes out there. And so I can further review that information, and yeah, we can report back as to what the possibilities are for MSD's involvement.
And I'd be happy to talk with you between now and then, because actually there may be a solution that would work not only for our residents, but I think from an engineering perspective and potentially from a cost perspective, might be welcomed by MSD relative to essentially creating a more consistent water flow and overflow into the water flow issue there. And so I think now would be a time for MSD to maybe look at coming to the table to working with us relative to that. So maybe offline, outside of, after this meeting, I'd be happy if you want to reach out to me. I can give you the update on that. But I think it's something that would benefit not only our residents, but also your organization, again, financially and otherwise, giving you more predictability as to that particular lake and what it does.
Okay, yeah, I can reach out, and we can certainly have that conversation.
Excellent. Okay, anyone else have any questions for Councilmember Edens?
Yes, is it Reapy?
Correct.
Okay. I think before you come back to us, you might want to kind of triage the communication process within the engineering department. I say that because the Highlands subdivision, which is inside of Wild Horse subdivision, is one of the worst areas in the city. And I have personally been out with Director Vunich and now a total of 3 MSD engineers. And we have been in contact with MSD through letters and the HOA subdivision. And what concerns me is that even if you don't agree with the city's position that there were some odd decisions made by MSD in terms of changes to the creek bank and city and infrastructure that we believe you are responsible for fixing, even if you don't agree with me, you have still had your lines exposed for over a year now because of riprap and boulders that have shifted. So I don't know how many times I can bring it to your attention that your own lines are exposed. So there's something wrong where we are bringing attention to employees about issues that directly affect your infrastructure, and then nothing happens. So you might want to review the process.
Particularly just to add on, Mr. Rippey, to what Councilmember Edens mentioned, because presumably if those situations aren't taken seriously or nothing's done about them, and then therefore, at least theoretically, it takes more money to fix it later, I'm assuming that those costs are passed on to your customers, which would be our residents. So we would definitely like some sort of input from you at the next time we meet on that, if you could.
And I would like to add too, if I can, Mr. Mayor, that when you do decide to do big changes or maintain your infrastructure, that it would be helpful if you would let the city know ahead of time, and especially so that we can let our trustees know, because we have seen a couple of failures with designs that just simply don't hold in storm events. And that's what I'm talking about in this particular situation. So I can tell you that we would not be happy as a task force, or nor would our consultants be, if things were fixed the same way. So we would like to be a part of the dialogue about how things are going to be fixed. But at
And
the
if I,
very least, communication.
thank you, Councilmember Edens. And if I could add to that as well, Mr. Rippey, to the extent you're able to do that, that gives the elected officials of the city the opportunity to publicize that and let residents know, which in turn, I think would give rise to enhancing goodwill for MSD. So you could get a twofer on that one. Okay, any other comments or questions for Mr. Rippey? Mr. Rippey, do you have anything you want to add further? I really appreciate you being with us tonight, and on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
Anything further you want to mention before we close?
No, I think if you can pass along that list of areas, we'll take a look at that. We can talk, about Lake Chesterfield.
Sure.
And circle back on that, and then the Highlands subdivision.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, have a good evening and a great week.
Thanks.
Okay, council members, moving next to appointments. We have two, both of which relate to the Architectural Review Board. The first is moving Ms. Rhonda Loja from an alternate position to a permanent position. And this is, as you could glean, presumably from my appointment memos, this is these appointments, not only because of their abilities, but also because of the reconfiguration of Ms. Loja, allows me to continue to comply with the rules about a minimum number of architects and so forth. So she's already on the board. We would just be moving her from, and she's from Ward 1, would be moving her from a current alternate position to a permanent position. If you have any questions relative to her background, I'm happy to answer those. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to approve Ms. Loja to that position from Ward 1. Made by Councilmember Clark. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Brost. Any discussion on the appointment? Seeing none, all in favor of the appointment, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. So she is approved. And then next and finally, her position, I'm proposing to be filled with the appointment of Ms. Lindsay Marion, who has an architectural engineering degree. She is from Ward 8. She's also been involved on our Town Center Update team and is very eager to continue to be part of our team in this regard. If you have any questions relative to her or her background, I'm happy to discuss those. Otherwise, I would also ask for a motion to approve the appointment of Ms. Marion. Made by Councilmember Garetano, seconded by Councilmember Galani. Is there any discussion on the motion to approve the appointment? Councilmember Garetano?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment that Ms. Marion has been a great asset to the Town Center Update team. She brings a lot of good experience. I'm truly impressed with what she's been able to do for her city. She's fully invested in our city. Her family's also here in Ward 8. So just a great addition, as well as Ms. Loja. I do want to compliment her as well. But just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you so much. Any further discussion on the motion to approve the appointment? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. And thank you again. Moving next into legislation, we have no public hearings this evening. The first is Bill 2569. It is before the council for final passage and it concerns all wards. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Bartoni, seconded by Councilmember Edens. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2569.
Bill 2569, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, amending the Code of Ordinances of the City of Wildwood, Missouri by enacting a new section 415.505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, to the zoning ordinance of Wildwood, Missouri that will provide a new and progressive approach to the consideration and management of development sites that have inherent special circumstances associated with them due to a range of causes, both man-made and natural, all of which is consistent with the action of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Final letter of recommendation on the subject that was dated August 3rd, 2020, second reading.
Okay, thank you. And as you know, we've had a lot of discussion relative to this, and it's been on the agenda at least a couple of times. Joe, do you have anything further you want to mention relative to Bill 2569?
Mr. Mayor, yes, not so much regarding the specifics of the bill itself, but just the information that's been provided to City Council for its consideration. First and foremost, as you know, the packet was provided to you in advance of tonight's meeting on Friday. Part of that packet included a memorandum that had been prepared by the city attorney and I regarding the steps that were taken to try to address the concerns that have been voiced both by the public, those specifically that live in the vicinity of the Strecker Forest site and the Callahan Tract, as well as that information that came out of the discussions at City Council. Supporting that memorandum were attachments, two in number. The first is a working draft of regulations relating to reoccupancies and notification of the city. This is a key element for the purposes of ensuring that not only the first buyer of a property in a special circumstances overlay district or otherwise is aware of any potential issues or problems, but also subsequent owners of that property being able to be notified as well. These are not up for consideration tonight. They will follow shortly, but both Mr. Young and I thought it was imperative that you understand, instead of trying to do a hit and miss approach, having a reoccupancy component almost assures that the city will be able to identify not only the first and second owners, but those that follow in years to come. Finally, and somewhat in an unusual step, both Mr. Young and I wanted to provide you the red line version of the proposed bill. That reflects a lot of input over the course of time between Mr. Young's team at his office, here at the Department of Planning, and equally important, you as representatives of the residents, the City Council, and the residents themselves. I think it was important for Mr. Young and I to show you that we took into account as many of the comments as we could to create a better bill that ultimately would create a better overlay district. Finally, there is the amended version of the original bill. And I think if you've had an opportunity to review it, you will see that it is much more comprehensive and detailed, particularly about the process of the phase 1 environmental assessment, as well as the phase 2 environmental assessment. And there are rationales and reasons why we may not have gone as far as some would want. There are constitutional issues associated with some of this, but all in all, I would like to use the analogy that I think Ms. Clark has used in some instances. The overlay district is really the frame of the car. The site-specific ordinance that is required under the overlay district becomes all of the other components, the engine, the transmission, the seats, the steering wheel, et cetera, that is added. And when we have the ability to write a site-specific ordinance, we have the ability to address the site characteristics to that are inherent, as well as to address any particular issues that may be on abutting properties, meaning that we can, through the overlay district, at least acknowledge those things and try to address them or provide what I would consider milestones for the future if they should develop or be sold. So from that perspective, I can only say that I hope you found the improvements satisfactory, and I would defer to Mr. Young if he would like to add anything at this time with the mayor's permission.
City Attorney Young, anything to add?
I have nothing to add, Mayor, but I am available for any questions.
Okay, thank you. And just a point of personal privilege, I know you had several comments from the public as well as council members, and you had one from me in particular relating to the protection of 3-acre minimums and ensuring that this does not affect that. And I'm glad to see that in section F. Councilor Bartoni.
Thank you. And I'm going to start off by just thanking, the city staff. This has been a long journey, kind of like what was mentioned just a few minutes ago. There's been a lot of hours, a lot of hard work. I want to thank Joe and his team, City Attorney Young and his staff. Council members have probably asked questions and read about things they never thought they would ever have an interest in. But just as importantly, our residents who have taken a very active approach in this and had a lot of great questions and a lot of interest that we hope we have answered and included. Also want to acknowledge, Joe, the planning meeting or whatever it was called that you had a few weeks ago, and quite a few residents had questions. We went from some of the residents that said, no, never, no way, ever on this to yes, we can't do this quick enough. So thank you for answering all of those questions. About 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, whatever it was that we first postponed this, I had made the comment that it was very important that we get this right. And if you look at the current ordinance, the guts of it didn't change much, but it is very tight. So I guess my question for Joe, my first question would be, Joe, do you think we have it right?
I believe we do, primarily because of the efforts of Mr. Young and his and attorneys at his office. We basically have tried to find the best standards, those from ASTM, those from the federal and state governments, and those that we saw from other municipalities across the country. And what we've tried to do is to ensure that when we look at contaminants, whatever the range may be, we are using the latest and best standards, those that are adopted, promulgated, and put into place. So I like to think that, again, we've created a solid foundation to review future proposals on sites that just have unique characteristics, whether they're man-made or natural.
Thank you. And just to reiterate some things, I'm going to ask you probably to answer some questions here we've answered a few different times, but just to make some people feel a little bit more comfortable. Joe, the one question we get is, this was going to help developers. Is the purpose of this legislation to help development in areas that we would consider having environmental concerns?
It is not intended to help or harm a developer. What it's intended to do is provide City Council with the best information possible regarding their decisions. And so depending on your perspective, if you're a developer, this is a tall mountain to climb. If you're a property owner, you have to be patient. But if you're a resident, you'll have information that we've never been able to provide at the start of a process that we will now have because of the overlay district.
And another question that I've gotten from quite a few residents, and it's been asked at our meetings, is would existing developments, existing subdivisions, would there ever be, and do they have a concern that this special circumstance overlay district would be so-called labeled on their existing area development subdivision?
From the department's perspective, the intent of the overlay district is to be applied to new sites, sites that will be identified from the second step in this process. But to apply it to existing developments that have, let's say, a PEU from St. Louis County or a PRD from the city of Wildwood, I would think that would be very difficult to do, if not impossible, because again, I believe the property owners would have to agree to it, and that agreement would have to be 100%. I would defer to Mr. Young on that question as well.
I agree with the director's assessment of the purpose and intent of the bill. Is it theoretically possible that it could be applied to an existing development? Theoretically, yes, but that would have to go through the zoning process with public hearings and public notice and opportunities to object and appeal, and I think it unlikely.
Thank you. And my next question, and I don't know if this one's going to be for Director Vunich or for City Attorney Young, but there's been a lot of resident questions and concerns about the moratorium that is currently in place. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if my memory serves me correctly, the purpose of the moratorium almost a year ago was to give the city time to develop legislation regarding environmentally sensitive properties. So is that, can you confirm, and if you want to expound on that, am I accurate about that?
With the direction, I'll take that one. The answer to your question is yes. The ordinance that approved the moratorium expressly stated its purpose. And it was to be a temporary moratorium on the development of certain identified properties within the city that are in whole or in part located within the site or that have been impacted by contamination at or near the site for the duration of the Planning and Zoning Commission's study and review of public health and safety issues and possible regulations and standards related to development, and during such period of review by the City Council of such regulations and standards. So that was the express stated purpose of the moratorium and the ordinance that approved the temporary moratorium.
Thank you. And I guess my next question, Joe, and this could help answer Dr. Allen's question that she had during the public comment is, can you explain like what's next? What's the next step? I know on the first page that you sent us, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth whereas, the second line says eventually identify certain properties in the community. So can you explain to our residents and anyone has isn't quite clear on this, how this will, what the next step, what we do next? This goes back to P&Z and we start identifying these properties?
That's correct, sir. I think it's unrealistic to assume that a property owner is going to come forward and say, I want this particular overlay district applied to my property. So the intent was always from the beginning, at least from Mr. Young and I's perspective, is that we were going to designate properties that would be suitable for this overlay district. And those properties would be placed on a list. The list would be the subject of a public hearing. The property owners and neighbors would be notified, and we would basically hear any concerns, any support, and everything in between. So that's the next step. A third step is the working draft of the regulations relating to reoccupancies and notifications and et cetera. But truly, the next step is the definition of those properties that would be subject to this new overlay district if adopted tonight by the City Council.
Thank you, Joe. And I'm in full support of this. I think you did get it right, and I appreciate the work of everyone involved in this. I think it's the right thing to do, is to pass this now. Obviously, something permanent in place is better than something temporary, and I plan on voting in favor of this.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Dodwell.
I just want to echo what Councilmember Bartoni had also mentioned. This has been a long ongoing issue in my ward and his ward particularly. And this gives us a tool that can more readily detail out and perhaps stop development in areas of concern. And it also gives us, I think, the opportunity, if someone wants to develop in a particular area, to be able to put the onus of responsibility on that developer rather than on the city of Wildwood. So I think this works effectively for both of those reasons, and I would love to second this.
Okay, so the bill is on the floor for final approval as amended. Seeing no further discussion, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for Councilmember Garetano.
Yeah, sorry about that. I want to thank first council members from Ward 2 and Ward 4. I know you have all spent a lot of time and very close to this. So thank you for looking into the extreme details here and the comments that you shared tonight. Looking at the bill here, I just see tremendous improvements. Love the perpetual ability for disclosure that is there. I think that that's going to be big for our residents and for people to know that this way there is disclosure around it. And also just raising the bar across the board with all the different conditions here so that this is not, properties that are looked at are not looked the same way as you would at any of our other parts of the city here. So just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Clark.
Yes, I want to say thank you too, because this was a lot of work that they went to put this together. And I wanted to address some of the concerns from the residents that reading all of this information that they got and can get from so many different areas and trying to put it all together. And there's documents that are written well, and there's documents, there's 500-page document that is not written well. So it's hard to pull out all of the information that will help explain what's going on. There's a number of calculated uncertainties, and just the methods of measurement make it difficult to read some of the things that are listed. So I think that it makes it disturbing to us when we read it and we wonder what's going on. But after reading it myself time and time again, and all of the documents that supported, there's limitations in those documents. So I think this ordinance is to address all of those limitations that we have and how we can address the problems of any area that has contaminants. I had gone over this a number of times in detail, and I believe that this ordinance is our best way of dealing with areas such as the one that was talked about tonight in our comments. So I will support this.
Thank you. We actually need a motion to amend the bill that was presented previously to incorporate all of the additions that everyone is so fond of. So Councilor Bartoni, are you making a motion to amend the bill as presented?
Yes.
Okay, and seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. So we're going to need to have procedurally discussion on the amendment, and that can be a voice vote. Then we'll go back to the bill if the amendment passes or not, and we'll have a roll call vote on that. So seeing no discussion on the amendment, all in favor of the amendment to the bill 2569, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so the bill is, Bill 2569 is amended as presented. Seeing no further discussion, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2569 as amended.
Mayor, can I interrupt?
Councilmember McCune.
We try to raise the hand before you move forward with the bill
That's
to
all right.
ask
Go
a
ahead.
little bit more questions. So I apologize you didn't see us. I just had one resident question, and I think it's part two for Joe that came up. As far as identifying the properties that would fall underneath the special overlay district, do they present or do they discuss that at a later time to incorporate what they feel should be included or not? Or should that have been discussed by now?
Actually, it has not been discussed as part of the framework, the overlay district. But what I would suggest is that there'll be a list created to the benefit of the Planning and Zoning Commission as a starting point. But the true intent is to hear from the residents as well. And if they believe there's a site out there that they know has a unique history relative to environmental contaminants, or it has a physical set of characteristics that are so onerous that they know that there are problems there because they drive by it or they live next to it. That's the input we want from those residents.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Sorry to cut you off. I just want to make sure residents that are asking these questions, that they hear it from the department, that this is still being worked on and this is not just the final stop and it goes as it is. So I appreciate your time, Mayor, and thank you, and I'm ready to vote.
Councilmember Rambo, my apology, I missed you as well.
Sure, that's fine. I asked some questions and had a lengthy discussion about with our city attorney about the fact that I really couldn't find any language that explicitly protected the residents in the surrounding areas. Mr. Young answered most of those questions. Mr. Vunich answered most of the rest. I think this is a great step in the right direction based on conversations I've had with a couple other council members, including our resident chemist, and I'm ready to vote as well. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember McCune. Councilmember Nahan.
I just have a quick clarification question. I know we're, improved disclosures to users and buyers beyond the first set of them. And you'd mentioned the reoccupancy. I know the city does not require occupancy permits for new construction. How would that play out? Like, how would that be administered?
Joe?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Nayan, this is a big step. I will not understate that requiring reoccupancies is not a major step, but I will note that St. Louis County already requires reoccupancies in the unincorporated area. And since they are a contractual agent, they are prepared to provide reoccupancy inspections. And so as part of that, we'll know when a property is to change hands. And if it's on our list or under the governance of a special circumstances overlay district, that's when we know that we need to do the notification component, and we'll depend on the real estate industry to assist.
Okay, thank you. That was my question. Appreciate it.
Okay, so now seeing no further questions or discussion, thank you for those additional comments and questions. Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2569 as amended.
Yes.
Councilmember Nayan.
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
Councilmember Gross.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
Councilmember Murray.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Galani.
Yes.
Councilmember McCune.
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo.
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Councilmember Bernardino.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2569 is passed. Moving next to Bill 2577, it's also for the council, before the council for final passage as a second reading, and it concerns wards 5, 7, and 8. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Bertolino, seconded by Councilmember Flasher. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2577.
Bill 2577, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, amending Traffic Schedule 5 through highways, roads, and streets, adopted by Section 390.010 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Wildwood to include Taylor Road, Village Hills Parkway, and Old Fairway Drive, second reading.
Okay, thank you. Anything you want to add further relative to this bill, Rick, beyond the information the council's previously received at the last meeting and at this meeting?
Thank you, Mayor. I have nothing further, but I'm available for any questions from the council.
All right, thank you, Rick. Any questions for Rick or any comments on the bill? Seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2577.
Councilmember Nayan.
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
Councilmember Gross.
Yes.
Councilmember Clark.
Yes.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes.
Councilmember Remy.
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yes.
Councilmember Galani.
Yes.
Councilmember McCune.
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo.
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano.
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher.
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2577 is also passed. Moving next to Bill 2578, it's before the council for final passage on second reading, and it concerns wards 7 and 8. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Garitano, seconded by Councilmember Flasher. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2578.
Bill 2578, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, amending Chapter 390, Traffic Schedule 6, intersection stops, adopted by Section 390.010 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Wildwood by putting intersection stop restrictions at the intersection of Old Fairway Drive with Nantucket Island Drive, second reading.
All right, thank you. Rick, do you have anything further you want to mention relative to Bill 2578?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do not, but again, I'm certainly available for any questions from the council.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Any questions for Rick or any comments, any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2578.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo, Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2570, 78, sorry, has passed. Moving lastly to Bill 2579, it's before the council for final passage on a second reading, and it concerns Ward 6. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Rambo, seconded by Councilmember Clark. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2579.
2579, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, reapproving an adjustment of certain common boundary lines between three existing parcels of ground known as attractive land, being all of lots 1, 2, and 3 of Winden Pine subdivision, which is located within the northeast quarter of Section 16, Township 45 North, Range 3 East, County, Missouri, and more specifically situated on the south side of Melrose Road, east of the State Route 100, for the purposes of reconfiguring their common boundary lines, for the purposes of defining their current use pattern, boundary adjustment plan, with such being in accordance with the city's subdivision and development regulations. Second reading.
Thank you. Joe, do you have anything further you want to mention to Bill 2570 relative to Bill 2579?
No, sir, Mr. Mayor, but I am available for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Any questions for Joe or any comments? Councilmember Bartoni?
No, I did that accidentally. Sorry.
Thank you for mentioning that, Travis. We'll make sure everyone gets a chance to talk when they want to do it. Okay, seeing none, no further comments or questions. Roll call vote, please, on final passage of Bill 2579.
Councilmember Burrs,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Remy,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember McCune,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon, Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni.
Yes.
Okay, Bill 2579 has passed. We have no first readings this evening. We have no resolutions. Moving into miscellaneous, we have two items, both receipt and file. The council's been provided with information on both of those. Joe, do you have anything you want to mention relative to, first of all, the CUP relative to the solar panels in Ward 2?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, the report, I think, is self-explanatory, but I do want to recognize that the City Council has the authority to exercise its power of review over any action granting a conditional use permit by the Planning and Zoning Commission. That power of review must be exercised within 15 days of your receipt and filing of the report, which is tonight. Mr. Jacquin has been kind enough to share the screen to show the location of the proposed solar panel installations. They're on Joe's Way, a private street. And again, in the report, the Planning and Zoning Commission acknowledged that solar panels are beneficial, and in this case, met the requirements of the zoning ordinance. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them on behalf of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Joe? Any Councilmember Dodwell?
I would just like to make a comment that I think as we move forward in our energy resources, that we're going to, as a council, need to be more accepting of solar panels, potentially on the front sides of roofs. And I certainly don't have a problem with this development request that's on 3 acres of private property. But I would ask that we keep a more open mind as we get into more requests for such improvements to people's homes.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, Joe, seeing none, PZ 2597, the second one, Sprint Spectrum LP.
Again, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Briefly, members of the City Council, this is the required annual renewal for a telecommunications tower that's located at the Marinus Retreat Center. This is by far the most successful application of our farmer model telecommunications ordinance. I believe we have 5 or 6 providers on this particular telecommunications tower. It is our best co-location spot. I would note that this does not apply to Joe's Way AT&T. That was an item that was discussed during work session. This particular location here at the Marinus Retreat Center was unanimously endorsed for its annual renewal. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Bartoni.
I don't have a question on this, Mayor. I just had a comment I wanted to make during the miscellaneous part, so whenever it's appropriate.
Okay, we'll get to that next. Any questions for Joe relative to PZ 25-97? Okay, seeing none, you're on, Councilmember Bartoni.
Thank you. So real quick, I just wanted to congratulate the Lafayette girls cross country team for their state championship over the weekend, and job well done. And then also a little bit more, I guess, relevant, but just a big thank you and a happy Veterans Day to all of our veterans in Wildwood and on staff and on the council also. And appreciate everything that you and your families have ever done for all of us. And also, I hope the city staff enjoys a well-deserved day off on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just thank you, Councilmember Bartoni, for mentioning the girls cross-country team. And we, as a personal note, our lieutenant here within the precinct's daughter is on that team, Hope. Yeah, so congratulations to all of them.
Councilmember Garetano.
I just really would like to express my appreciation for the support on the amendment of the traffic schedules here in Ward 8, the ward that's on the move and on the right track. So thank you for making it great in 8.
Well, you're welcome, Councilor Garetano. And apparently you didn't read it carefully enough to realize that there's a prohibition on putting welcome to Joe's ward at the boundary lines. But I can show you where that is later if you want to. All right. And we know that Joe's Way was not named after Joe Vintage, presumably. So
it was not.
Okay. I thought that might be the case. Okay, so we, anything else under miscellaneous before we adjourn the council meeting? And then we do need to go into the work session to adjourn that meeting. It'll take just a moment. I'd like to do that earlier. Okay, seeing nothing further, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the council meeting made by Councilmember Galani, seconded by Councilmember Farmer. Non-debatable. All in favor of the motion to adjourn the main meeting of the council, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So we are adjourned. Thank you for an excellent meeting. And again, and then moving into the work session, we have nothing further other than an adjournment there. So we're now back in session on the work session. For the work session, I would ask for a motion to adjourn the work session made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Godwin. Also non-debatable in this section. So all in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you very much. And thanks to our city team that were with us this evening. Steve Cross, Travis Newberry, Julian Jacquin, Joe Bennett, Rick Brown. Thanks for all you do. We appreciate it, particularly for the logistics for the meeting, Travis, getting everything going. I see you have lots of screens there. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.